Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of the Anyone Uni live podcast. Tonight, I'm with an ex-student that I worked with when I was in Singapore at Tanglin Interest School. His name is Yash, and he is a student currently at UC Berkeley in California. I haven't talked to him since he graduated, so I'm very, very excited to have this opportunity to chat with him tonight. We're going to cover lots of different things. How was it like for him in high school and the whole application process, and then how was the transition and how is life now as a student at Berkeley. Hi Yash, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Great, I'm great. I'm always happy to connect. This is a great way to stay connected with students and to hear all about their
That
journey.
was just brilliant. Yeah,
Right.
it's like a full journey, like once finishing everything. So yeah, definitely enjoying this.
Yeah, no, that's very exciting because we spend so much time with you guys. As you are in your final 2 years of high
Yeah,
school, and then you disappear into university life, and it's great to reconnect.
yeah, 100%, 100%.
All right. So tell me a bit about you for or the audience that doesn't know you.
Yeah.
Where did you come from? Where did you grow up? And what was your journey up to graduation?
Okay. And this is like up to Tanglin graduation.
Yeah, basically, yeah, yeah. Where did
Okay.
you live in different
Um,
places? Where are you from?
yeah. So I was actually born in France, but then spent 7 years in Finland. Then came to Singapore in 2011, and pretty much was in a different school for 2 years, and then Tanglin from year seven onwards.
Mhm.
And that was kind of the whole transition from moving. So moved around a whole bunch growing up. But yeah, Tanglin definitely felt more home. That was where kind of I grew up the most, learned most of my things, found my interest for economics, which is one of the big things that I'm going to focus on later on. Um, and yeah, that's kind of a quick around for me.
So do you feel like Singapore is home to you still?
Yeah, 100%. It's one of those things when people ask me questions like where you're from, especially with like if you're not from the US, everyone finds it very like fascinating. So Singapore's always felt the most at home and always felt comfortable. So I still consider it very much home.
Yeah. And so you don't have an American citizenship.
I do not know. So I still carry an Indian passport.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, we're kind of in the process of deciding and transitioning into potentially US citizenship. But the process for that, it does take a while. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's kind of where I'm at.
All right. And so what kind of students were you? Well, first of all, what did you study? Was it so in our school we had A levels, British A levels, and then we had the IBDP, and you were an IB student?
So yeah, I did IB. I was very much one of those students that knew and was convinced of doing the IB many years before even starting it. For me, it was the kind of range of breadth. I enjoyed the way the structure was and the kind of focus on very essay based, very research based, and all of that. So I mean, IB was kind of a no brainer, no questions asked. We have to do it types. And within IB, my higher levels were maths, economics, and physics. Um, and yeah, that was a great time.
Okay. And so how did you choose these three higher levels? Was it the three subjects you liked the most, or was it because you felt like it was aligned with what you wanted to do? Like
It was,
your rationale?
yeah. I think for me, it was trying to keep the options open. So at the time, especially coming into IB, I wasn't fully sure what I wanted to do. For me, the two big paths were either doing mechanical engineering or something to do with engineering, as something that I found interesting, hence physics and maths. And then economics was this kind of newfound interest that I had once I finished GCSEs. And it definitely felt like economics was more what I liked. Mechanical engineering was more what I thought I would do in college.
Mhm.
So I wanted to keep both the options open, which is why IB was perfect. Um, and for me also, it was a big focus on like those subjects were a good mental rigor to like get a really good working understanding of difficult subjects that I found interesting as well. So yeah, mainly to keep options open and then also to have some sort of intrigue of what I want to do in the future.
And so yeah, so you didn't know exactly what you wanted to do when you started
Yeah,
the IB, right? Like most students.
100% no.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think kind of IB helped me A, figure that out a bit more. Um, but B also gave me enough breathing space to like very much be comfortable with doing things I wasn't sure about, or like testing different waters. And it's one of those things where, especially in the US universities, which I ended up going for, um, you still are not 100% sure what you want to do. So IB was something that really kept a lot of the doors open, which was really good for.
Yeah. And so without diving into your university experience, because we're going to keep that for a little later, but looking back, how did you feel like the IB prepared you for university life?
I think it did a really good job. So the transition is something that people talk about a lot for kind of college and things being like more difficult. I think the IB is very rigorous, both in the amount of time it kind of asks from you, but also from the level of difficulty that that subjects have, especially the high levels. So for me, I learned a lot of skills that are like not necessarily tested in exams. So it's more time management, it's like kind of organization, it's like keeping multiple threads together
Mm.
and being very sure about, hey, I have 10,000 things I need to do in the next week, how to prioritize it, how to organize it. One is an exam, one is an essay, one is a report I need to write. So for me, I got very accustomed and very excited about doing things in different formats, which is what the IB asks, and also being very, very good at time management. That's something that I struggled with in the first year of IB, but slowly towards the end, it got much better. So I think those soft skills are things that you don't necessarily notice or think about when you're in like they're in college, but also when you're kind of in high school. You kind of just think about, hey, I need to finish my exams, get a good grade, maybe fine. But you realize that majority of these soft skills are the ones that are more tested in the future.
Yeah.
So I think that prepared me a lot from that perspective.
Yeah. And yeah, we work with a lot of French back students, and they also have that range of
Yeah,
subjects and feel like they're juggling with a million balls at the same time. So I think that's quite a similar preparation.
yeah,
Um,
100%.
yeah. All right. And so you just mentioned that you did your GCSEs because it was a British school. So GCSEs are a set of exams that you take 2 years before you graduate. So end of grade 10 or year 11 in the British system. Can you tell us a bit the grades kind of that you got
Yeah.
on the GCSEs?
Yeah, so I think I did 10 GCSEs, so this is like ages ago. I got 9 A stars and then 1 A.
Hmm.
So that's across all subjects. And my back kind of, yeah, that was probably the first like external exam that I did that was very like public facing, not internal. But yeah, for me, studies and classes were very important. So trying to hit that 10 GCSEs and 10 A stars was the goal, but
Yeah. Yeah,
was
it was pretty impressive. Um, all right. Did you take the SAT?
I did. Yeah, I took the SAT twice. I did it once in grade or year 12.
Yep.
And then once just before it's basically starting
Yeah.
year 13. Yeah.
And so you ended up in a school where that is test blind, like many in California. So they don't look at test scores like standardized tests anyway. Do you remember what you got on your SAT?
Yeah. So I got a 1490,
Hmm.
just broken down by 800 in maths and then um 690 in English.
Whatever's left in English. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and that was the score at the end, like my second time I did the test. So that was the highest one that I submitted to majority of the schools. Because the US was a big focus for me, so ended up really prepping and trying to push for that. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And outside of the academics that you just described, what was your personal profile, and what did
Yeah.
you do outside of the classroom?
I think my approach to a lot of kind of the things outside the classroom was three things. Doing a lot of different, unique, different like things. So that included things like sports. So I focused heavily on being captain of the badminton team, was part of the volleyball team as well. So both those teams we traveled around and played pretty competitively. Um, and I really want to take leadership in those areas. Second aspect was a lot more about kind of new interesting things that I could start. So one of the things I really focused on was the Time Economics Forum that I co-founded with one of my really good friends. And for us, that was a profile and a forum where you can bring in experts of economics, experts of industry, and we talk about different situations and different scenarios that we expect coming up. And for me, I think that was one of the core focuses that I really wanted to push. Um, Finding a club, seeing how it grows. I hear that it's still running in Thailand now, so that's really nice.
That's really yeah.
And then my third aspect of it was joining the existing clubs that we had at Thailand. So that included things like Modern United, like MUN, so Modern United Nations, TEDx conferences, and taking leadership positions within those groups as well. So for me, I think those are the three aspects that I really focused on. A, because I enjoyed it, but B, also because I think it helped improve the application for college too.
Yeah. Do you remember when you started that club with your friend?
Yeah.
What year was it?
We started that club, I would say, my first year of IB. Yeah, year 12, grade 11. It was one of those things where we started it before things got very busy. We also wanted to see how far and how much we can grow it. So we really wanted some time before applications came, and we also enjoyed that aspect. Excuse me. So I think, yeah, it definitely was a year and a half before. So pretty early into my IB is when I started it.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that. And so you had a well-rounded profile, very strong academics, and you really engaged into your interests, whether it was sports or clubs and the things you like. So I think that's really the way to go for the US. These are important. Students have to not be shy and not only not be shy, they have to make the effort to take the time to do these things. Do you feel like it helped in your application process?
Yeah, I think so. I think so I applied to both the UK and the US, but the US was a big focus. So having and I think we were told very early on that when you're working and when you're applying to colleges, especially in the US, grades are not the only thing. And oftentimes like the decision at the end will come down to the other things that come across with your application. So I definitely think it helped. Because grades were important, but it felt like a lot of people would have the grades going into the school they wanted to apply for. So what is like the edge factor? What is the final thing? And for me, I think that was the well-rounded, well-balanced approach to high school.
Mm-hmm. And so how did you approach your application journey? I remember you having quite a few schools on your list.
It was a big list.
Yeah.
It was a big list. So for me, this is a very candid approach, was going to the US is a big commitment, both in terms of fees and as well as like in terms of the time commitment and very new places. So for me, if I was going to the US, if I was going to the US, it was going to be somewhere I really was excited about, but also a school that on paper is like ranked highly and all of that, because it was a big financial decision. So I think my approach at the beginning was, cool, what are the schools that are really well known for economics, which was the kind of the main focus for me. And then once that filtering was done, was when I started thinking about, hey, I like this school because of XYZ reasons. I like the location, or I like the way they teach, or I like the way they format their classes. So I think that was kind of a two-factor approach into understanding what schools I choose. And I think finally, you and I, of course, had many discussions about kind of what the best strategy is, because the US has what we know is like early decision and early action, and these kind of strategies that you can try to increase your chances of schools that are kind of pretty selective. So that was kind of the initial approach for schools.
Yeah, I remember a lot of discussion on the strategy and early decision 1, early decision 2, what's going to happen. And was UC Berkeley at the top of your list originally? Was it not? Like how did that school place in your choices?
I think Berkeley is one of those schools where because it had a separate application and you can apply to multiple of the schools within the University of California system, we both agreed that, like, hey, I'm not sure, I don't know much about the West Coast schools, but it is you should apply because it is Berkeley and it is something that like a lot of people love and have a great experience in. And I think a few of our alumni also went there, so we had some level of understanding of the way Berkeley like structures the school. But to be honest, I had done very little research about Berkeley at the beginning. I think for me, I really wanted to go to the East Coast schools. I liked the structure. I liked the smaller class sizes. Um, and I think for me, that was a big factor. But we applied to Berkeley, and of course, once you start getting decisions back, you also spend a lot more time researching the schools once you've applied, which was the funny thing. So
Ideally, that's
I
done before, but yes, that's usually
exactly.
often what happens.
I would catch myself in classes, once we applied in December of the year, researching random school. Hey, maybe like, Berkeley does have this really cool program or this cool thing. So for me, I think it was never an active decision that Berkeley's a top choice, but it was a very like 100% if you do get an offer, like that is something that you take a very serious decision on. Um, and I really am grateful for getting into Berkeley and UC Berkeley and making this home for the last 4 years.
All right, so we'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. So on the UC Berkeley, as you said, it's the University of California application, which is slightly different from the Common App. They don't take the SAT, and you have 4 essays to write. Do you remember that process? Do you remember how you strategize on these 4 essays? Maybe it's a bit far, but do you remember kind of the 4 stories you took or the 4 angles you used?
Kind of, yes. So I think we had an option of 8 topics, and we could pick 4 of the stories that we apply for. Or we
That's
talk
like
about.
that's that. Yeah, you're correct.
And they're all 250 to 300 word essays, so fairly kind of standard in terms of what you'd expect from a college application. And it was one of those things where you apply to UCLA, Berkeley, Davis, and every other, on UCSD and every other school within the same essay. So we could not be very specific about, hey, I really like this program in Berkeley, or I like this thing, because the essays would go to everyone. So I think that was the struggle of trying to find essays that both capture you as a person, especially the 4 different topics that you talk about, but also capture you within the school system of UCs, not in the school system of Berkeley or LA. But I think the tactic here was, I think I'd written a lot of applications and essays for other schools. So we kind of tried to rework a few of the previous ideas we had. And the aim was to talk about yourself in 4 very different lights. Can they see me as someone who, takes sports very seriously, who enjoys, I think one of my really fun essays was about economics and this one small unique TED talk that I listened to years back that got me interested in economics. And that was the start of like, hey, this is why I want to do economics at UC schools. And I think it's really cool that you can do X, Y, Z with that decision. So I think long story short, it was a bunch of trying to figure out what are the 4 completely random and different angles that we can approach through those essays. And they ended up being, one was drama, one was economics, one was sports, and I'm forgetting the last one. But yeah, that's kind of the person type.
Yeah. Do you feel like, so one of the big difference with the UC system is that they are public universities. What can you tell us and what can you share with us for our students to understand what's different? What does it mean to be in a public university compared to a private university? They're both very expensive. They can be both very prestigious. So could you give us a sense of what the difference would be like?
Yeah, I think the day-to-day, you won't necessarily see the large differences between a public and a private university, but class sizes was kind of the first thing that hits you. So Berkeley class sizes are average, like one economics class that's like upper division, which means like this is like your 3rd year course, is 500 students. You will very rarely find a time where you're having that 20-to-1 ratio of teacher students, which is like what you'd expect in a private school, especially in the East Coast. So I think that was the first exposure of the difference between public and private. The second thing is you understand very quickly that like the public universities within each of the states is a very, very big part of that state. So for example, a lot of students from California will go to Berkeley, and you will very quickly realize that like, yes, there's a lot of international people because it's Berkeley and you can find those nooks. But if I broke down an average class, a good 40 to 60% of them will be from California, born and raised, growing up in California. And that is a very different experience to what we had at Thailand, a very, very different experience to kind of when I grew up in Europe. It's a lot more I wouldn't say diverse, but a lot more kind of fragmented in terms of where people come from. Whereas in Berkeley, the same high school that's 30 minutes away from Berkeley sends 100 kids to Berkeley out of 7,000 kids
Wow.
every year. So you very quickly realize that like this is pretty much an extension of like that state, and a lot of the high schools within that state do send a lot of students there. Um, and you will see them like yeah, you'll meet a lot of Californians. So and then I think the same experience goes for like UMich in Ann Arbor. The same experience goes for a lot of the UT schools in Texas. Um, so I think that was the two big changes within kind of public and private. Bigger class sizes and a lot more representation from the state that you're going for the school.
And how did it feel as an international student? Like, is it, even if it's a very high, still a very high international student population in these schools, is it very divided and you feel like the Californians kind of stick together, they already know each other, or do you really all mix very well, like in terms of the clubs? Is it the same thing? Is it, how is the
Yeah,
dynamic in these groups?
I think it depends on how you make your experience. So there's a few things that you kind of can and can't talk about, right? Like I think being international, we talk about traveling or we talk about like home is very different to what they talk about home being. So I catch myself saying like, oh yeah, like I'm going home like for Christmas to Singapore or um and the thought of like taking a 16-hour flight home was something that most people don't really experience or do because they can just drive home. Like they have all their like super easy things. Like if they need to home cook food, they'll drive 20 minutes and get home. If they need to do their laundry, they'll just go home. And it's things like that when you realize like, hey, it's very different being an international student. To answer your question more directly, when it came to mingling and kind of getting to know people, I never felt like there was a group here and there. You definitely can find yourself applying to clubs and groups that are more international. So one of the big things for me was like, hey, I wanted to like I joined a few clubs in college. One was a consulting club and one was a tech club. And when they say, hey, do you have any questions for us? I would always ask, hey, do you have international kids in this club or like what is the reputation? But yeah, I never felt like it was an issue. I never felt like I was upcasted at all. My best friends are also from California, but also internationals. So you can definitely find and kind of get your path. And you won't notice the difference when you start making those friends. You just will at the beginning because they have a lot more other amenities that they can just go home and do things with.
Of course. And so
Yeah,
how was
group wise
it,
was not an issue.
how was the transition for you, being 16-hour flight away?
Uh,
Singapore?
it was good. I think for me, I really wanted to travel far for college. And like for me, it was hey, I want to explore, see what happens. It definitely was a uphill battle at the beginning because like at Tanglin, all you focus on is your classes and your studies and the sports you play and whatever else you have. Um, I never thought about trying to like, make food at home because mom was there. Or, all the other like amenities that we get from Tanglin, which is a lovely school. Um, I think in Berkeley, especially because it's a part like it's a public school as well. You have to find a lot of opportunities yourself. They will not give it to you. So I would catch myself trying to bounce classes and applying to like internships, and trying to cook and trying to clean and keep a house that's also organized. And I think that transition was probably the biggest transition for me, less the actual classes and the difficulty of classes.
Yeah.
Because now you're doing hard classes, but you're also cleaning the house and taking time to do all the other things that you have to do. And you're like, hey, this is a lot of things that I did not think about doing. Um, so from that perspective, control living alone, I would catch myself calling mom, being like, hey, how do I cook this? I felt very homesick, so I actually love cooking now. So I spent my second year at uni learning how to cook and noticing it cook pretty well. So very happy with that. And in terms of the classes, it is a very different approach. Like because it's a public school, if you don't know a concept, you're not going to, your teacher will not say, hey, let's sit down and help you with this. I remember at Thailand, if I had a question, if I didn't know something, I would just go to the teacher and they'd sit down, they take 30 minutes. That is not directly the case at uni. You're an independent person. You can choose to, yes, try and learn that concept if you don't know it, or you can choose to give up and go ahead. And for me, there was no like balance of, hey, I don't know this. Like I have to get myself to figure it out and ask the right people and go, push myself and be more proactive about it. That is something that you don't necessarily need to do as much in high school because it is smaller, it is more like local. College, no one is there to do that for you. So I think those two transitions were the biggest things for me.
And so, in terms of housing, because we all hear that in California it's difficult.
Yeah.
You were just saying before we started recording that they only guarantee housing for the first year. So, did you go to student housing the first year, and how was that? And then, how did you manage after year one?
Yeah. So my experience is a bit unique because I was in the COVID year. So housing was a bit separate and a bit kind of siloed out. So I spent my first semester at home, doing online classes. So Zoom learning was with parents. My second semester is when I moved into one of the housing units in Berkeley. And luckily I got one of these apartments. So it was a 2 bedroom, 1 bath, and each bedroom had like 2 people living in it. So it's worked about a house. We had a living room, we had a kitchen, and it was great. The typical experience usually um, during kind of post-COVID or now is that the first year students will get a room, like a 3 bedroom room. So it'll be like a bunk bed and then a normal bed and like a few tables, and it's pretty cramped and pretty small. Um, so for me, I think the experience was a bit different because it was COVID, so there was less people on campus, so we got more space. Um, but yeah, it was a typical what you've seen, movies. If you see kind of the dorm life, I think you're not trying to make it a really really comfortable place, but it was a very easy way to meet new people, talk to them. My neighbors now are still my closest friends, basically. So represented with social life. Even during COVID, there was some level of like, hey, I know these people because I live near them, and like we became friends because of that. So it's good. But after that, you have to like find your own apartments and find your own housing. So my second year, I lived in a house with a lot of Singaporeans actually. So me and a few other friends from other high schools within um, Singapore, we all just got together. We knew each other through kind of Zoom, and because Singapore was home to us, so we lived together. It was a 7-person house.
Nice.
There's a 4 bedroom, 2 bath. So pretty nice spacious wise, but like a lot of people in the house. And I think that's pretty synonymous with experiences of Berkeley living, at least for the first year. And then my last 2 years in college, I wanted my own room. I wanted something that like was less cramped and also like spacious and less people. So I lived with 2 friends in a 3 bedroom, 2 bath, 2 floor house, which was like absurdly spacious, like super close to the campus. And yeah, that I think was for the most of it.
So it's not that difficult to find housing as a Berkeley
Um,
student.
no, but you have to do it early, and housing is pretty expensive if you don't find it early. So like for me, I was paying 1,200 US dollars for a single room, which is like stupid expensive. Um, and that was still the cheaper end of what you get. Now the prices are anywhere between 1,600 to 2,000 US dollars per month. Um, and in addition to paying, your uni fees, and then you realize that you're paying,
And you're not living
yeah,
in Palace.
exactly. But I do think that's a bit more on the California problem than like another uni. Like if you
Yeah,
went
yeah,
to uni somewhere else, it definitely would be a bit cheaper. I think California schools definitely have it slightly worse.
yeah.
Um, but no, this me like of course New York is the worst, but yeah, um, California is not great.
Very interesting. If we go back to academics for a little bit, students and international students struggle often when they have to choose, especially some schools, they can be kind of undeclared. But in the UC system, you kind of have to choose your major, declare a major when you apply. And so how did you go about that? And how was the reality when you got on the ground? Like, are you really tied to what you put in your application? Do you have any wiggle room to change, to switch? Do you see that with your friends? Like, how is the whole process of choosing that kind of major or majors and then the reality on the ground?
Yeah. So I definitely think there's a lot more wiggle room than we initially thought. But the wiggle room comes in. So Berkeley has multiple colleges, which is like the degree providing school. So you can be in the part of the College of Engineering, you can be part of the College of Arts and Sciences. you can be part of the business college, and each of these colleges will award different types of degrees or different number of degrees. So I was part of the College of Letters and Sciences, which at the time awarded majority of the basic degrees. So anything that's non-engineering, non-like medical, you would get a Bachelor of Arts in maths and economics and computer science, and like poli-sci. All of those were under this one college. So for me, if I wanted to swap my degree or what my major was, as long as it was still provided by this college, it was a very easy process of me telling them, hey, so I came in as an undeclared economics, and of course I ended up taking the economics degree, but if I wanted to change, I could very easily change. So my first year I came in as an economics and I was doing math. And then because everyone in Berkeley likes computer science, I thought of taking a few computer science classes. And then I in the end realized that I wanted to do both computer science and math and economics. So I ended up taking both those degrees. So you definitely have a lot more wiggle room than you think. But the final kind of thing to kind of consider is Berkeley has something called capped majors. So these are like high demand degrees that like a lot of students want. And because it's a public school, they can't give everyone the option to do an economics degree or a computer science degree. So we had certain requirements. So I don't think so for depending on the degree or the major, the requirements change. So for economics, the requirement was that you had to get a B average on the first like 4 classes that you're supposed to take before you declare the major, which I don't think was that difficult. I think it's a very like manageable. They just want you to be intentional about, hey, like, are they serious about doing economics? But for example, for computer science, the classes are much harder, and they intentionally try and make it a class that's difficult to start and learn, for the purposes of kind of saying you shouldn't do it or you can do it because they don't have enough space. So for computer science, the average was a B plus, but it was 3 classes, and the average class, like the class average was basically like a B minus, and you had to get a B plus to be allowed to take the kind of following classes. So
same for international students and domestic students, even if you're paying these fees, it's the same rules for everyone.
Yeah, same rules. And so the school does a very interesting job. They change this every year. So now we're not allowed to, like, if you want to do computer science at Berkeley, you cannot come as an undeclared. So if I joined Berkeley with the same application, it's for economics, I like this year versus like 4 years ago, I would not be able to do computer science. But
Wow.
when at the time I was allowed to, because the schools were more lenient and were kind of like okay about you changing for computer science. But now it's like much more in demand. So they've actually completely separated out computer science. You have to apply into computer science before you even start college. Economics is still the same. So you can swap around with economics, maths, and that's still a very, very okay and approachable experience. So yeah, definitely a lot more wiggle room than the UK system. But there are certain checks and balances that they do to mitigate you from basically saying, hey, I want to come in for this other degree and then change it, on day one.
I think two great advice here is what matters most is the college you choose, like the faculty you choose. So making sure that within that faculty there's subjects you would be happy to maybe move through, and then careful with computer science. It's so popular that if you want to do that, you probably should declare that right away before when you apply.
Yeah. I think that's a fair conclusion. And this is of course like Berkeley specific. So
Yeah.
I think other schools are still more lenient.
Yeah. That's very very interesting. That's the kind of thing that's very tough to kind of information is very tough to get when you're high school students on the other side of the world and applying to 10 different universities in the US, and understanding that each school will have their super specific way of doing this, because this is really true for UC Berkeley. It might not even be true for UCLA, which might have computer science under a different faculty, etc. And then from other US schools, it can be totally different.
I will say also, like, the notion of capped majors and like you have to get a certain grade to pass, like this was something that I knew once I got the offer for Berkeley. And I think that was one of the things that me and my dad were talking about, being like, hey, yes, getting to Berkeley is one thing, but if I can't do the degree I want to, should I go to Berkeley or should I go somewhere else? And of course they make it sound a lot less approachable than it is. So coming into the school now and realizing like what work I had to do to be able to get my economics degree, it's still not as terrible as what they marketed as. Like, hey, you have to get this minimum grade and things are hard. And yeah, I think some things are a lot more approachable than what they market, and some things are a lot worse. So once I got the offer, I think being more proactive and talking to people who actually go to the schools is something that is really important. So that helped when I was trying to make my decision, talking to other, Thailand alumni that went to Berkeley, or getting your advice from kind of the people that you knew. I think that part definitely helped me make the decision better.
All right. And so now that you're approaching the end of your undergraduate degree, what no regrets? Did you feel like it was, I don't know if you can compare it with some other friends that maybe went to different US unis, or do you feel like you got what you wanted, what you expected from a US education, that this is going to bring you where you want to go?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's kind of a few takes here. So comparing it to kind of others US uni friends, and then comparing it to kind of UK uni friends, and I think you get a very different experience and a different takeaway. I really wanted an experience where you feel the school spirit and you're part of the system. And I think for me, a US school was that, and Berkeley was spectacular on that front. I also am very grateful that I started school in the US, because that means I can want to work in the US, and that is something that I don't think we consider or think about much. Um, so if someone is really wants to work in the UK, then maybe UK system is better. Like for me, if I wanted to work in UK now, it'd be a lot harder.
Mhm.
But if I went to a UK school, that's different. So if you really want to work in the US, um, doing an undergrad or doing a degree in the US is really important. And I think I hadn't thought about that and considered that. I just wanted to go to uni in the US. Um, of course, that changed and me want to also work in the US, but that's something that one should consider. And in terms of like the whole no regrets, I think a US uni covered 90% of what I wanted out of the experience. Um, I think the being a really, really huge country, it's hard to like travel a lot when you're in the US, just because you're so much further away from both, like especially because California's on the other side. Like traveling to Europe is a whole day's job. Traveling to Singapore is a whole day's job. So you kind of feel a bit siloed within the US. Um, so I didn't travel as much as like my friends who went to school in London or went to school in,
And a weekend in Paris, a weekend in Amsterdam, a weekend in Rome.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even kind of like it was just like the ability to do that and travel, and it still be very, very affordable compared to the US, where things are pretty unbelievably, like, not expensive, but also like far. So making that decision was difficult. Or those travel plans. But yeah, very much a good experience. Had a great time, learned a lot. I think the experiences that you and I talked about 4 years ago of, hey, I want to do this or understand this about the US system, I think I definitely got all of those things.
All right. So what's next for you? What are your, so I guess because you're doing a STEM degree with ComSci, you would be able to get an extension on the visa you get after you graduate?
Yeah, so I was on a student visa at the beginning, but then because family moved to the US as well, I was part of the green card track, so we ended up getting a permanent residency
Oh,
my
really?
second year of college. So that opened a lot of options of like, hey, I can do things that maybe are not part of the degree and still sit in the US. Um, but yeah, so I think the next steps here is working in consulting for a year or 2 years. We'll see how that goes. So living in SF, and then moving to New York after that. So still in the US, enjoying my time, and yeah.
All right. Did you do any internships or, yeah?
I think so that's the one thing that a lot of kids don't talk about with colleges. Different schools have a very different approach to um, your kind of professional degrees and your professional like career. Berkeley is a very pre-professional school, and what I mean by that is because it's in kind of the Bay, Silicon Valley. A lot of the students come in with existing internships in high school, but B, also this very like big mentality of we have to get internships, we have to get the best jobs. Um, I think that definitely created a lot of stress for me, because you come from Singapore or you come from not in the US, and you're there to learn and you're like there to just take the classes and enjoy time. And then you realize that, hey, there's a whole different part of life that is like trying to get jobs and internships. I think my friends from other schools had a better experience with this, where the college system was not as stressful in terms of, hey, you have to get this internship or you have to get this job. I think Berkeley is a bit questionable in that, and just because a lot of the students are very much in the mindset of coming to Berkeley because they want to get a software engineering job. And that is something that they have made their mind up from the very beginning. Whereas most students think about that in their third and fourth year of college. But yeah, so I did a few internships. I did a few software engineering internships because of the computer science degree. And then I did a few consulting internships. And for me, consulting was just a job that I enjoyed more, found more growth out of, and it just makes more sense for my long-term plan. So consulting was kind of the best part of it.
All right, cool. All right, I think we kind of did a good overview here. Do you have any advice for grade 10, grade 11 students that are dreaming about the US, dreaming about maybe California, maybe the UC, maybe UC Berkeley? What would be your advice to your younger self or a younger student that's looking in that direction?
I think this is a very interesting question. I feel like people have asked me this question and it always kind of changes because I'm trying to think of all the things that I would want to know. I think the biggest advice is talk to as many people as you can about these schools, because a lot of the things that you will find on the internet or Googling the school gives you only so much information. I think talking to someone that goes to the school, talking to someone who's went to the school before, will give you a lot more of the nuances of, hey, like this is the social culture, or this is the way the jobs work, or this is how classes work, or this is how teachers work, like teach. And I think these things definitely come into your whole overall experience. For example, I really enjoyed a small school system where it'd be like one teacher to 15 students in high school. That was not the case in Berkeley, and I thought I'd be fine with it, and it would be a very easy learning curve. I think for me, that was a very big struggle because I didn't have that one-to-one connection with the teachers, which was something I really cared about. And yes, you can see that number on Google and see, hey, like it's a 1 to 50 students ratio or something like that. But understanding it from the perspective of a fellow student helps you understand, like kind of ground it more. And it's as easy as like you make a LinkedIn account and you will just LinkedIn message a bunch of students from that school that you're interested in. More than okay to people. Like people are very receptive to talking. I get LinkedIn messages from students that are thinking about Berkeley or have chosen Berkeley, and 90% of the students that you message will reach out and say, yes, let's set some time up. I'll tell you exactly what the experience was. So do that. I think that's the best piece of advice I can give. Apart from that, I think know that there's a very high chance of where you go to school is where you'll end up long-term, especially in the US, for jobs. So if you're trying to, if you want to work in the East Coast immediately after, think about going to an East Coast school. If you want to work in the West Coast, think about going to West Coast school. I think those are things that you don't necessarily think about because who thinks about jobs when they're, applying to college? But very quickly I realized like majority of the jobs and majority of the people that are like hiring for Berkeley students are in the West Coast for now. And then you're trying to do the extra effort to try and move to the East Coast if you want to.
Well, these are great advice. I learned a lot today with you, Yash. So thank you so much for the chat.
Thank you so much.
If you're with us live right now, just stay connected if you want to ask questions to Yash directly. Otherwise, if you're following this podcast afterwards, thank you for listening. Subscribe to the channel if you want to follow more of these interviews, and we'll see you on another episode of the Anywhere Uni podcast very soon.